Great. Thanks. Welcome, everybody, to another one of our Wednesday afternoon sessions. Today's talk is on the scoping review. And I've asked my PhD student, Mpoi Maketa, to give this talk because she is so good at it. She has read all the literature around how a scoping review is done. She's done a couple of herself. She's done a couple herself, and she's helped several other students. So she knows the theory. She knows how to get around the databases. I even go to her for help very often. So I'm not going to take up any of your time, Mpoi. I'm going to hand over to you directly. Thanks for agreeing to do this talk.
Thank you, Prof, for the invite, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm just going to share my screen now. Quickly. I don't think I have a button to share screen. I'm not sure. Oh, here. Oh, yes.
Yes, you are a co-host, so you should be able to do it. There we go.
Yes. So thank you very much, Prof, for this opportunity as well. I think every time I do this, I always have to go back and read, so it helps me with learning even more about a scoping review. So I'm very happy to share what I know as of now. So just to give an outline of today's talk, I will be describing evidence synthesis, which I believe, Prof, you're now an expert in that and you're going to love it. And then define a scoping review, its purpose, and also its application. And then show different steps in developing a scoping review. And that comes with sharing a bit of technical tricks in our search strategies. And then towards the end, I will give a practical demonstration. Or actually, as I talk, I will also be showing with slides, but at the end, I will actually start the whole process afresh with everyone. So before we begin with the scoping review, we first have to talk about evidence-based medicine, which is one of the most important topics of late, because it forces us to reflect back on what it is that we read that informs our decisions and that we should be considering before anything else. So evidence-based medicine is defined as a practice or care that emphasizes the practical application of the findings of best available current research, which is very important. That's why I wrote it in bold, because we then have to ask ourselves, what is the best available current research? How do we even know what best is? How do we know how to go about finding research that can inform our practical application of any of the findings? So basically, it is aimed to provide healthcare professionals, patients, and all other stakeholders with up-to-date and scientifically proven information on specific medical issues. And, yes, thank you. So I'm sure a whole lot of us who attended today have taken part in research, and this research they are all important. However, when it comes to making the final decisions, especially within a clinical setting, then the level of importance or how much we can rely on the findings from each study differs. And according to this hierarchy, the animal and lab studies are important, but the reason they're at the bottom is because the findings cannot be the findings of each study or each research paper cannot be directly applied without any sort of bias or question or anything that may come in. Whereas as the hierarchy goes up, we do have primary studies that are conducted on probably human participants. And as we go even higher, we have studies like the meta-analysis and many other systematic reviews and scoping reviews and different types, because at that point, there has been a critical analysis and comparison and contrasting of the findings within each field or a topic or a certain application. And it has been compared with different studies. Some are similar, some are different. Contradictory results have been considered, and probably understanding the why is it different, why is it not different, and what could this mean. And therefore, our scoping reviews ranks also quite high above the primary studies in terms of how much can we rely on the findings of that particular study for us to actually apply this finding within, especially the clinical setting. So there are different types of reviews that people conduct, such as the systematic review, the literature review, which I believe many of us have actually conducted or taken part in. I don't even know if I should say conducted, because there isn't much of a structure when we just search for literature and write our introductions, mostly in our thesis. We have overviews, we have mixed methods, we have rapid reviews, and today's topic, which is a scoping review. So a scoping review it has existed for a number of years now. The framework was first defined in 2005 by Axel and O'Malley, and then over the years it has been refined and more comprehensive details have been added on, and I'm sure it will continue throughout time in order to improve, especially how much we can rely on a scoping review. And again, besides the holistic structure, there are different scoping reviews that are shaped or fashioned for a specific field, such as healthcare literature, for example, because different fields prioritize different things. Like right now, the laboratory studies will probably put more emphasis on laboratory techniques, whereas reviews, the methods will be very different, but they would probably have different priorities when it comes to what it is that when we conduct a scoping review, we should be looking at. And so before we conduct a scoping review, or before we even think about it, I believe that when we look at the frameworks in which we should use, one should actually read up a little bit on what is relevant within their field or with whatever it is that they're trying to achieve with their scoping review. But basically, scoping review is defined as a type of evidence synthesis that aims to systematically identify and map the breadth of evidence available on a particular topic, field, concept, or issue, often irrespective of the source. And by source, they're talking about primary research reviews, non-empirical evidence, as opposed to just a loose term. And this is within or across a particular context. It's also used to clarify key concepts and definitions in literature and to identify key characteristics or factors related to a concept, including those related to methodological research. In many cases, scoping review is often confused with a systematic review, but these two are very different, and that is why also when you look at the publications, they do specify when it's a systematic review and they specify when it's a scoping review. But basically, the key differences are that a scoping review can actually be used as a precursor for systematic review because it does investigate whatever it is that you're trying to investigate, but the findings are often used to inform further research, whereas the findings of a systematic review often can be applied practically, if I may put it that way. So it can be, a systematic review can be used to confirm current practices or even question. It can be used to identify or inform areas of future research, identify and investigate conflicting results. So a systematic review is more detailed and more specific, whereas a scoping review sort of scopes over or scans over a body of research that focuses on a particular topic. And just to make an example, you may find that the aim of a scoping study or a scoping review study would be to investigate an association between methylation and cancer development, whereas a systematic review would go even further, looking at these studies that investigated methylation and cancer, and then focus on the techniques that were used and whether the techniques that were used to quantify methylation or to even reach a certain conclusion, to see whether they can be a reliable diagnostic approach in cancer and whether they can be used practically within the laboratory in order to diagnose. So the focus is sharper in systematic reviews versus a scoping review. However, both are still very important, especially in research. So the key components of a scoping review basically include the research question, the Boolean terms. I will go through this with you in detail. So it's the Boolean terms, the appropriate search strategy, the databases that we use, and the data analysis tools. So there is this Prisma diagram that has been developed where they show different steps, and perhaps we can also use it to guide ourselves in terms of where we are. It's a step-by-step, but we often use this in recording our results, and I will go through this with you. So first, we start with the identification. So identification is basically what is our research question? What are we trying to answer, and where are we going to start? How are we going to identify the papers that we want to include in our study? And so there are a few things to consider. The first one is the Boolean terms. So if, let's say, we want to know whether methylation leads to colon cancer development, we would consider our Boolean terms where we need to think when authors actually publish, do they all use the term colon cancer? Or are there other scientific synonyms that they could use that will help us reach as many relevant papers as possible? So the first thing would be to look for synonyms for whatever it is that we're trying to research, so that we can have the best possible outcome and make a better informed opinion due to what we found. So there are different ways in which you can find the papers, which I will show in the next slide. But basically, you may find that while one paper wrote colon cancer, the other may say colorectal or rectal, and writing only one may lead to you missing out on other papers. Therefore, we're going to have to consider all these terminologies. Same as cancer, where other authors would say cancer, others carcinoma, malignancy, tumors. So that's the first point of departure. The next thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of study types are we focusing on? Are we going to search for experimental studies? Do we want reviews, clinical trials? Because at the end of the day, we need to know what it is that we are comparing. Or when we form an opinion, it has to have some form of a basis so that we're not comparing apples and bananas. We need to think about our study subjects. Are we going to focus only on papers that do their experiments on humans, on animals? What kind of specimens are we talking about? Are we talking blood or tissues? And then in terms of analytical methods, how should they have collected the data? And can we trust this study if it comes in this fashion? And then the next is the source of data. Are we going to consider peer-reviewed papers and books? And if so, which databases or bibliographies or libraries are we going to use? Are we looking for opinions, of which we may find on newspapers, TV or radio interviews and magazines? And then the other considerations would be things like language. Are we going to stick to one language? If not, do we have the proper translation tools so that we don't distort any data that we get? Are we going to consider the date of publications, especially in hard sciences, where the methods actually change? Therefore, like the methods that were used to investigate the same concept 10 years ago is not the same as what we may be able to see right now. Therefore, the results may not be the most comparable if you're focusing on, let's say, colon cancer, not necessarily the techniques or the lab methods that were used. So one of the ways that we can search for the synonyms is by using the NCBI database. You can either just type whatever that you want to search. Here I wrote colon cancer. And when you click on it, you will get this option called mesh. It will give you different terminologies that other authors have used and are available in publication that you may want to consider when writing or when doing your search. So in this case, it gave me about 26 results. And when you click on it, it will show you how other papers write it. Here we have colonic neoplasm, for example. So you already know that had you only searched for colon cancer, you may have missed out on this particular paper. And therefore, now when we search, when we actually go in and type our terminologies or our Boolean terms, we know that we have to expand our search by including more relevant terms. So after doing the mesh search, I then, for methylation, there wasn't other synonyms that I often used to describe methylation in a way, and therefore we know we can use it as it is. However, with colon, we know that there is colon, colorectal, rectal, and bowel, with cancer as well. And then the next thing, as I said, it is the source where you actually have to sit down and think, do I want peer-reviewed papers from peer-reviewed journals? And if yes, then you know which databases you want to search from that would be relevant to your field. So right now, people who are within the medical field will consider medical databases, whereas people in business might actually have a different target. Same thing when you think about the papers, if you're going for the peer-reviewed papers, where should these terms be when we actually type? Do we want all these terms to be in the title? If yes, what is the possible impact of that? At times, it might actually restrict the number of papers that you may have. But also, if you say they must appear in the title, then you may get even, in the abstract, then you may get even more papers that are irrelevant because some people may use colon cancer as reference or to just give background to introduce the main focus of their paper. Same thing with a body. I mean, you would probably get 100 million results just from the body. And then we need to consider things like a time frame. Do we want papers from 100 years back, or we want the latest, of which we know that scoping reviews consider the latest, or at least as well, the evidence-based medicine would want to consider the latest and most reliable publications. And also, you agree on the language of instruction that you want to use. So this step in particular requires a bit of collaboration because you do want to hear what other people may contribute to this, because just going on it alone, you may miss out on some of the things. But let's say, especially people who are expert in the field, they might actually tell you what other terms are used, let's say for the Boolean terms, or may be able to advise on the time frame, or even just helping you with screening the titles or screening the abstracts, just to give you. It is a bit tedious, it's a lot of work, but if done as a team, it goes by quite fast. So after you have then agreed on your Boolean terms, the next step is to do the search. So I took this slides from when I was using the UKZN website. So the benefit of using this website, especially like you can still access the databases when you just go on Google and type the database, but because you're not subscribed as an individual, you may be limited in terms of how many papers you have access to. But if you go about it through a university website, whether it's UKZN or any other, that you know has subscribed to a whole lot of databases, then you have access to more papers. So to go about this, we find it at the library tab. You select library, you get this page, you go to resources, databases, and then you can select whether you want them to be arranged alphabetically or by subject or any other way. And then when you get to this page, for the UKZN, there are results that you get when you are on campus, and there are those that you get when you're off campus. So if you're not at any of the 5 campuses, it's better to just select off-campus access, and you will get a list. It's still a very comprehensive list that you can choose from. And I'm not sure why they are different, but it's better to just choose the right one. And this is just for the UKZN students and staff, because you're going to have to log in with your credentials. So just for the slides, I then selected EBSCOhost, and this is the window that you will get. So it shows where you can type your Boolean terms, and you have to select where it should appear. So this can be the title, this can be the abstract, the body, the author, the references, anywhere, whether it should appear as an and or as an or. As when you select, let's say, synonyms, then you're going to use or, but between colon and cancer, then you're going to have and, because it's an addition to the list. I will demonstrate all this at the end. But after you have selected, you will then get your results. And after you get your results, you can download them, which I will show again. Now, in many cases, it's better to actually use more than one database because some of the papers may appear in one database, but not the other. So we repeat the same process with the same Boolean terms and the same search strategies, whatever restrictions that we may have. If right now we want to restrict to the last 5 years, what we do in EBSCOhost, we are going to do it in another database that we're going to use. If you use 5 databases, you apply the exact same Boolean terms and search strategy altogether, and then you can download to your citation manager. So this is just the first step. And then the next step is the screening. Prof, I don't know whether we should open for questions as I go so that other people are not left behind, or I must just continue?
I think just continue. People will put questions in the chat and we'll talk about them afterwards.
Okay. So the next step is the screening. There are different citation managers that people use. Unfortunately, I'm only familiar with EndNote, which I use all the time, but there are also others that we can use, and they do offer certain flexibilities. Others are free, others allow for different things, but unfortunately, I will only talk about EndNote for today, which I use to do the screening. So within my databases, the first step is to download the results. So it will show this window where you can export the papers that you got when you did your search. And then depending on what citation manager you have, it will then give you the relevant file. So for me, it gave me this file, which I can open with EndNote. So these are the results that I would get. I only selected 50 for the purpose of the presentation. But consider that if you searched from 5 different databases, there is 100% chance that there is an overlap between the different databases. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to remove the duplicates so that you don't find yourself reading 900 papers where 400 are just duplicates. And there is an easier way to do that, where you just select duplicates and delete them. There can also be duplicates where other databases write authors' names in full, whereas others write, especially first and second names, with as their first letter or initials. And therefore, you want to screen both by title and by author in order for you to be sure that all the duplicates are removed. Also, you want to screen your titles. Many times you get titles that are not even relevant to your search. I'm not sure why. I think that the databases just won't give you exactly what you want. Sometimes they also give you papers that they think are relevant. So just a quick screen of the titles, just you read them and then you delete all that are not relevant to your aim or what you are looking at. So step 3 is determining eligibility. So this is where we start to look at things in a bit more detail, where we now screen the abstracts. Personally, I look at the aim of the studies, I look at the study types, and I look at the methods. So the aim of each study will tell you whether you want to include it or to exclude it. Because right now, if you are not sure yet what you want to read, you may find that other studies want to optimize or validate methodologies, whereas other studies are actually investigating clinical relevance of something. And that's where you think to yourself, okay, which direction am I taking, so that I can exclude all studies whose aim is not relevant to what I want to do. Again, the study types. Are you going to focus on primary research, or do you only want to look at the reviews, for example, of which, again, you want to get rid of all the others that you may not want? Sometimes it's computational science, and perhaps you want primary data from actual participants. And then you look at the methods that were used as well. Some people actually have preference for specific methods, and especially statistical approaches to the data that was published. So in screening through just the results that I got in my EndNote, I found that we have papers that focused on computational genomics. We had papers that were focusing on the validation of methods and its application. We had papers which used blood as a source of genomic data, whereas others used tissues. And that's where you need to ask yourself, does this matter? Do I want to compare them? Do I want to include both, or do I only want to focus on one? We also look at the other papers also investigated specific genes, while other papers looked at whole genome. And then also other papers were identifying potential biomarkers. So you kind of want to ask yourself, which papers are relevant to what it is that I want. Sometimes when you start your scoping review, you're not sure yet what you're going to find. But as you read, that's where you get to have an idea of what it is that you want, and therefore what is it that you want to delete. But at times, if you're not sure, it's better to keep everything while you're thinking about it, but put all of them in groups for you to consider a bit later. So one of the ways in which you can do a quick erase is here. I actually went into my results and typed reviews in the titles. And none of the 50 papers were reviews. However, when you look at the abstracts, the reviews started coming up. Sometimes some papers will write meta-analysis, which is a type of a review. And you may actually want to type that inside your citation manager to just do a quick erase so that you don't have to go through. By the way, this one database gave me about 300 papers. So you can imagine if you did your search in 5, and this is EBSCOhost. So if you have Web of Science and you have Medline and you have all others, you're potentially going to end up with over 1,000 papers. So if you can get rid of unnecessary work as fast as you can so that you don't have any headaches after that, rather do that. So anyway, the next step would then be to download your articles. This is still part of screening. So there's an easy way to download all the articles, the PDF formats, so that you can then do a quick screen of the body. So some of the things that I found to be important are the study population, which are sometimes not well defined in the abstract, so that you know whether this is what you want or not. And that is found under the method section. You want to look at the methods that were actually used in the search or in the quantification or whatever it is that they did. There are also results, especially with the statistical methods and the interpretation of those results. I've often found papers that would, in the abstract, would just say, this is what we found, like colon cancer was affiliated with this and this and that. But then when you get to the statistics, they would actually write, oh, there was a difference, but it was not significant. And therefore, even before you start wasting your time with analyzing, rather go and check what they said about their results so that you know if this is the paper that you want or not. So after all this work, which takes a few days, sometimes weeks, and needs a bit of teamwork, you get to your inclusion and your exclusion. And that is after you've considered what all the papers are about, whether they are in line with the aim of your study, or in you helping you develop a new aim, if that's possible. You have now restricted your criteria. You now know what you want. So from just the 50 papers, you decide, okay, I'm going to look at experimental studies. And this is your method section, by the way. So you'll be focusing on experimental studies, focusing on colon cancer, identifying potential biomarkers, for example, and using tissue DNA in pair samples and in humans, because there are other studies that actually look at colon cancer in other animals. And then you can also have your exclusion criteria, which would possibly be non-experimental studies or studies investigating the same thing, but using RNA or histones or animal studies or computational data and all that. And this whole process that we went through is what you would explain in your method section of your paper. And actually, by this time, you sort of have an idea of what the aim of your scoping review would be, which in this case, I just said is to identify potential biomarkers for the diagnosis of colorectal cancer using methylation profiles in tissue DNA. And I'm able to write this because I already know that we have papers that I'm going to use. So this is where you actually realize that scoping review is different from a normal literature review that we do for our, let's say, our thesis, in that a scoping review is not like the papers that you finally get are not by chance. It's not something that a friend sent you, or while you were reading one paper, you just bumped onto the other, the way we do with a literature review. But it's a structured method. And there are protocols in place that actually guide with all this. And even where you deviate from whatever protocol that you are using, you can note it down. And you know that if someone wanted to do the same study, there are potentially going to get the same results that you got. So the structure of a scoping review will be the same as a scoping review paper would be the same as the structure of any other research, which would be the introduction, methods, results, and the discussion. And in this case, the introduction would be the introduction of your topic, which would be methylation and colon cancer. The methods is everything that we would have done up until now in terms of us searching for the paper. That's the methods of our study. And then we are able to then refer back to certain protocols that have been designed for a scoping review or for a literature search. And then our results would be the papers or the sources of information that we used. So if right now you used radio interviews, that's your results. And that's what you will be analyzing, and not necessarily the results of those studies. We look at the methods that are used in the study for us to even deem them fitting to be in our cohort. And then we can also discuss the finding of the studies, especially where we show contrasting results and why we are going to argue for whatever point that we will find. And then the discussion would be our analysis of the studies as a collective. So there are a lot of, for almost a whole lot of topics, there are already scoping reviews that have been conducted out there that we may actually use as a guide to what it is that we are trying to achieve. And they do have references to the protocols that they used in their search strategy. So I'm gonna pause for now, and then if we don't have questions, we're going to start our search afresh so that I go step by step with everyone.
Are there any questions right now? I'm just going to make a comment on, just to build on what Mpho has been saying. I get all my PhD students to do their literature review chapter as a scoping review. And that is since a time about 5 years ago when I had 2 people hand in their PhDs at exactly the same time. And they both happened to get perfect scores. And when I looked at the 2 theses, I saw that one of the theses had done a systematic review, which took her almost a year to do, and the other one had done just a narrative review. And I thought that if I was an examiner, I would be, on looking at these 2 different kinds of reviews, I could say that there was selection in the narrative review. I know there wasn't. I know how that was done. I know the integrity of the student, but an examiner wouldn't be. So to me, a scoping review fits in very well in a thesis for a number of reasons. One, it shows a good method of interacting with the literature, and that's what's required in the CHE attributes. They want to see that you've got a good relationship with the literature. So it shows an initial scoping of the literature. It actually does show where the gaps are in your research. And that is what's required at the beginning of a thesis. And the third important reason is it can be published. Many of the scoping reviews from my students have been published. It's a very good approach for PhDs. Shamila, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you, Mpho, for that. Just excuse my voice, I've got a bit of a flu. But I'd just like to find out, when we're screening and we're deciding the timeline of published sources that we're going to reference from, for example, if you have a phenomena that you're researching and it's way back 5 years or 3 years, and you've set your deadline or you've set your time frame for the last 3 years or 5 years, how do you overcome that? Because then we're going to get the rich data from the original research that was done years back. How can we work around that so we get the real picture of the phenomena? I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, I think you are in charge of your study and your question. The important thing that you have to consider is what you do in one database, you do in all the other database, and just being able to explain why you want to, let's say, investigate something from 20 years ago. Sometimes we have studies that look at trends. And for us to have a trend, we have to go all the way back. So it's okay that you can look at what was happening in the last 20 years, in the last 10, 15, and 5, and then be able to compare. Or also just to be able to say, previous studies, let's say 10 years back, this was a common practice, but in recent years, we don't have so many publications. So you can be able to like justify why you're using old data as opposed to the current data. So it's okay to use old papers. And again, there are fields where there isn't a lot of research. When you look at the last 5 years, you may only find 10 papers. And if you want to get more data, rich data, then you may be forced to go a little bit back. Yes.
And just to add to that, it's a very good idea to have a look at when the last reviews of any kind were done on your topic, because there's no point in reviewing what has already been reviewed. So you can have, when you're doing your thematic analysis of your different kinds of papers, you could actually have a section on reviews and show how many reviews were done on previous work. So you're not going to re-review that work. Good.
Okay, so I believe this is the home page, right? So this would be the home page of UKZN website. And I'm aware that there were also trainings that were offered by the library, by the UKZN library, on how to go about the search. I don't know if they are on YouTube, but in case anyone forgets, they can always refer to that, but I'll go through it again. So as I said, we come here to the library. Click on it, and then we go to resources. We have databases, and I'm just going to select A to Z. So because I'm not on campus, I then have to select off-campus access. But if you are on campus, then you can use the database as it was. And as I said, we now get a list of databases that we can access. So depending on your field or on your focus, you can choose any. And remember, we can also choose more than just one. And I'm just going to select PubMed for now, just to demonstrate. So this would be the page, and we go to advanced search. Sometimes it pops up as advanced already, other times it doesn't. So in our field, we're going to have to decide where it is that we want our terms to be. So here we have a long list that you should decide, and I'm just going to select title. And it was colon or colorectal, or Prof, do you remember what others were? Colon, colorectal, bowel.
Actually can't remember.
Okay, I'll just, yeah, because it's
colonic.
just sorry?
Colonic.
Oh, colon. Oh, okay. So if we have colon and colonic, what we can do is, or anything that ends, that has colon in it, that starts with colon, we can just put a star there. So every term that has colon in it will then be included. And as we can see here, we have colon, but here we have colorectal. And that is because this N will then restrict here in the colorectal. And then we say add, again in the title, we have cancer or carcinoma or I think it was tumor. And we add, and then we have DNA methylation. And we search. Let's hope it doesn't give us. Okay, so from PubMed, we have 55 results, which we know we can download. Because I said I'm using EndNote, when I do select our results, so I can select all the results, create file, which will then be downloaded here at the bottom, on my bottom left. And I can then open, oh wait, sorry, it selected a summary.
If I can also just say here that the first time you do this, you always actually have to tell the program which that you're using EndNote or Mendeley or whatever. And once you've programmed it once, it'll always automatically do it to that particular citation manager.
Yes, so it's very easy to download. But again, different databases may actually have different ways of downloading. I know that Web of Science downloads differently, like you sort of have to select each of the papers. They don't have the option to just say select all. With others, you actually have to first put them in a file and then go page by page. So in PubMed, we're able to select our 55 results, which would then open in our EndNote.
I'm going to come here again. The one way to get your head around a lot of this is to look at YouTube videos. There will be YouTube videos on how to use PubMed. There'll be YouTube videos on how to do Web of Science and all of those, and those are invaluable. And the thing is, you might have to do it over and over again because very often they change the way these databases work.
Yes. Prof, what are you seeing on your screen now?
I am seeing your EndNote file.
Okay, so this is how the results would then appear, and then we start with our screening process. As I said, we can, well, because it's from one database here, we might not have that many duplicates, but if we had sourced from different databases, then chances are we would. But again, as I said, based on the titles alone, you're able to tell whether there is duplicates or not, and you can always just screen through the titles to make sure. Because sometimes the author, the way the author names are written, as I said, some papers actually write name first, some databases write first name first, whereas others write last name first. And therefore you won't be able to automatically pick it up that it was a duplicate. So the next thing, the way you are also able to adjust your settings in your database to tell them what you want to download. So it's important that you select abstract as well, so that you can be able to simply just screen the abstracts in your citation manager. This is how they appear on our right, where you can decide whether this is what you want or what you don't want. You can also create here under my groups, you can always create another group. So here, let's say we can just say group 1, which would be all the papers that you want to include as you go ahead, so that you don't always have to go back to the master file and work with a bigger group. So if you find anything that you think, okay, I want to include this, then you just simply drag it to your group 1 and then go work inside your group 1. And if ever you want to reconsider some of the papers that you deleted, you can always just find them, you know, whether it's in recently added or it's in the deleted, but you have your final list intact wherever it is. So we do the title screening. The titles are here, would be written here on our right. And then we can also do our abstract abstract screening, which is also displayed. If you don't want anything, you can simply just click delete, and then it's off your list. Well, this particular list that you'd be working on. So after we have then selected what we want, like the number of papers that we want, our final selection, we then select everything and then come here and come here and find full text, where your citation manager will then go onto the internet and look for the PDF files so that we can read even further. It usually writes here on our left. It will tell us what it found, what it didn't find, and this EndNote is actually licensed by the university. So in many cases, the papers that need subscription would still be downloaded. Whereas if, let's say, wasn't licensed under the university, I may not necessarily have access to those specific papers. But again, if any other journal will not give you the papers, despite you searching through the university website, you can always write to the library, and our librarians actually help us with those papers. They will go and they will get them for us and email them to us. So
and if I can come in again here, we've got highly competent and very, very helpful librarians. I have never, ever not got a paper that I've asked for from them.
Yeah. And they also do it within a reasonable amount of time, like in 2 days. I think the most they've taken is like a week. And also they get back to you if they can't access the paper. So you always know. So while the computer is busy, we're able to see on our left those that it found. Also, if it found the links, but not the papers, and when it didn't find the papers at all. So sometimes we actually have to go into the internet ourselves and download the paper. Then I come in here and I attach it. At least it allows us to do that.
It doesn't matter how good your connection is. This is often a slow process.
Yeah.
So what is happening now is it is going through your computer and everywhere else looking for these papers. But if it doesn't pick up the paper, you just have to go into Google Scholar and find it and manually add the paper.
Yes.
And it's not very often that you'll find that you can't access it.
Okay.
Mpoi, maybe you can talk about here under groups that you've got group 1, which is what you might keep or what you won't keep, but how you can actually start grouping your papers into themes here before you, if you're not going to use NVivo, for example.
Yes. I actually wanted to open one of the papers. I think it's still busy, so it won't allow me to open, because you can read the paper inside EndNote. You can highlight, you can like edit the paper, whatever it is that you want to do. And let's say right now, if you created the first group, and let's say as you read the papers, you're picking up that specific papers are actually talking more about the methodology. You can already go and put them in your group 1. And you can name methodology, and then others are looking at biomarkers. You create another group, biomarkers. Oh, okay, it doesn't allow me to do anything, because even within a group, you can create subgroups. So you will have, let's say, group 1, which is methodology. You have 15 papers. Then inside that methodology, you create subgroups where a certain, maybe like 5 papers, we're using a certain method, whereas 7 papers looked at a certain method. You can have a group, and you can just copy and paste the same papers. So you can have another group with repeats from other groups as well, where let's say looking at the findings, if a certain method was used, and you can say, okay, if people used this method, this were the possible outcomes. This way, the 3 other subgroups under that particular group. So it's user-friendly, and you can highlight each time what you highlighted in one group. You don't necessarily need to highlight, like you can highlight different aspects on the paper, different, let's say you are highlighting within the methods in a certain group, but in another group, you are possibly just highlighting the results. So I found that with EndNote, you may not even need like other analysis tools, other data, what's this thing? Softwares for analysis. You can actually do everything in here. And you can also cite as you write. So in your Word document, you can, usually there's a link for EndNote, which will then help you to cite the papers that you're using as you write, which makes it a bit easier. Okay, now that it's done. Okay, so this is what I meant. So you can create a group set, you can create groups, smart group. You can also create an online group that your other co-authors or your co-investigators can access while you're working on the same file or folder So sorry. So just to make an example, this paper investigates methylation in patients with germline mutations, and therefore you can rename this to say it's mutations. So you can just select this paper, drag it to that, go on to the next. Just looking at the titles alone, well, that's after screening and you've decided some are completely irrelevant because not everything will be about colorectal cancer. But here it's, I think it sounds more like a review or an opinion. Aberrant methylation, have we entered the era of more than one type of colorectal cancer? It does sound like a review or an opinion. And again, you decide, do I want reviews? If yes, you come here again. What happened? And then you can say reviews, and that's where you're going to keep your reviews. So that you know that by the time you start with your data analysis or with your reading, you are actually comparing apples with apples, or you know that these are relevant to my research question and what I'm trying to answer. So I don't know whether I should continue since it's been an hour.
I think we could talk on scoping reviews for ages. I'm going to ask for final questions. Are there any questions anybody would like answered now? Paul, you've had lots of very complimentary comments in the comments below. I think that you've created a really I've seen you do this presentation at least 5 times, and it gets better and better every single time. This presentation will be available on the YouTube channel, and I suggest you download it because it'll be a really good reference to go back to every now and again. Last chance for questions, comments. Okay, then it just remains for me to say, Mpoi, I'm really grateful. I'm so proud of the way you have grown as an academic and how you are now able to teach pretty complex thoughts. And thanks everybody for attending. Next week is our final Doctoral Academy for the year, We'll be closing down for 3 months. And then we're going to have Dr. Veena Singaram talking to us about the examination process. So look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for attending today. Have a good evening. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, and thank you for attending, and thank you for the invite, Prof.
It's always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.